There are different ways we can add CSS to a page, and each way has its advantages or it might have its disadvantages. So let's review 3 methods we can use to apply CSS to our pages. To get started, simply launch a new workspace and follow along. You can also download the project files for each lesson in the Download section of each page. When we launch our first workspace, we'll see the files we need to get started over here in the left sidebar. But before we start, let's go ahead and close this console panel at the bottom of the page since we're not going to use it in this course. Over in our project files, we have an index.html file containing parts of our Lake Tahoe page. For now, we're only working with the header of the page and an introductory paragraph about Lake Tahoe. We should also see a folder named CSS, which we'll use in a later lesson. So if we click the preview button over here in the top right corner, that brings up the workspace preview in the browser. So in the browser preview, we see that our page is currently unstyled. But keep in mind that even if we haven't written a single line of CSS for the page, browsers use what's called a user agent style sheet that gives certain elements some default styling. That way users can still have a somewhat presentable and readable experience by default. So that's why we're initially seeing some white space around the page, below the headings, paragraphs, and between lines of text. These are the default styles applied by the Chrome browser. But even if we look at this unstyled page in Firefox, Safari, or Internet Explorer, it should still look just like this. So what we'll do first is write a few simple styles for this page so we can get a better idea of how CSS affects a page. So the styles we, designers and developers, create are called author styles, and there are 3 methods for adding author styles to a page. We can do it with inline styles, internal styles, and with an external style sheet. So let's go over these methods. First up, when we write inline styles, we write the CSS in the HTML file directly inside an element's tag using a style attribute. So in our index.html file, let's give the body element a style attribute. Then inside the quotation marks, we're going to write background dash color, followed by a colon and a space, then the word orange and a semicolon. So now when we save our HTML file by going over to File, Save, when we bring up the browser preview and refresh the page, we can see how this makes the background color of our page the color orange. And if we go back to our HTML file and give the h1 element a style attribute, so we're going to go in the opening h1 tag and add a style attribute, and inside the quotation marks, we're going to write color, followed by a colon and a space, then the word white and a semicolon. When we save our index.html file and refresh the browser preview, we see how the main heading text changes to the color white. So we can style any element with any CSS property using this inline style method. We could style the entire page with this method if we wanted to, but I don't recommend that you do that. In fact, inline styles are not considered good practice for developing websites, and they should be used sparingly, if at all. Because if we need to make any styling changes, it means we need to go directly inside our HTML to make those changes. So we're not really separating content from presentation, and the CSS gets scattered throughout the file, making maintenance difficult and impractical. Inline styles are also at the lowest level possible of what's referred to as the CSS cascade. They're very powerful and specific. That means they will override other styles applied to an element. So for example, if we declare a new background color style for the body, or a color style for the h1 element in an internal or external style sheet, we won't be able to see those changes because these inline styles will always override them. And we'll see that in just a bit. But inline styles may come in handy when creating quick HTML and CSS mockups, or if we're in a pinch, we can use the inline style method for debugging purposes or writing temporary fixes. So the second way we can add CSS to a page is with internal styles. Internal styles are usually embedded in the head section of the HTML document, and they're defined using the style tag. So inside of our head element, let's go ahead and add a style tag right beneath the title tag. And this time we're going to style the paragraph in our page by writing P followed by a set of curly braces. Then I'll place my cursor inside the curly braces and hit enter twice to create some white space. Then between the curly braces, I'm going to hit the tab key, then write font dash size followed by a colon and a space. Then I'm going to write 20px and a semicolon. Px stands for pixels, and we're going to get to that later in this course. So now I'm going to hit return or enter, and right below what we just wrote, I'm going to write font dash weight followed by a colon and a space, then the word bold and a semicolon. Now, don't worry about these properties, values, and the syntax just yet. We'll cover a lot of that throughout this course. For now, just know that the styles inside these curly braces will increase the paragraph's text size and make it bold. So let's take a look at it in the browser. I'm going to go up here and hit File, Save. Then in the browser preview, I'm going to refresh the page and notice how the text in our paragraph is now larger and bold. And now we can also do the same for our heading. So back in our HTML file, underneath the last curly brace here, we're going to style the H1 element in our page by writing H1 followed by a space and a set of curly braces. Then inside the curly braces, we're going to write font dash size followed by a colon, a space. Then we're going to write 90px and a semicolon. So now when we save our index.html file and refresh the browser preview, we can see that we have a pretty large heading on the page. So what if we want to change the text color of our heading? Well, let's go back to our H1 styles here, the ones we just wrote, and we're going to add a color property. So right after the semicolon, I'll hit enter, and I will write color, followed by a colon and a space. And instead of the color white, we want our H1 to be the color fire brick red, because that's a pretty awesome sounding color. So let's write fire brick, followed by a semicolon. So if we save our index.html file, go back to the browser preview and refresh the page, nothing happens. Our H1 is still white. So what's the problem here? Well, as we learned earlier, inline styles are really powerful and specific. So what's happening is the inline style in the H1 tag here is overriding the fire brick color we just wrote. So now if we go back to our H1 tag and remove the inline style, so I'm going to select the entire style attribute and hit delete. When we save our index file, then go back to the browser preview and hit refresh, we're now able to see the color of the H1 change to fire brick red. So the last thing we'll do is make the body color of the page white instead of orange, but we still want to keep the orange background color in the header of the page. So first, let's go back to our HTML file, and we're going to delete the inline style written in the body tag. So I'm going to select this style attribute, hit delete, and then we're going to go back to our style block, and we're going to style the header by writing header, followed by a space and a set of curly braces. Then inside the curly braces, we're going to write background dash color, then a colon and a space, followed by the word orange and a semicolon. So now when we save our index file and refresh the browser preview, we can see that the body background is back to the default color of white, while the header maintains that orange background color. So the internal style sheet method we just used is useful if we're creating a small scale site, maybe a coming soon holding page, or for temporary use while testing a new feature on our site. But again, it's not a best practice for developing websites. The downside to using this internal style sheet method on larger projects is that because the styles are written inside the HTML file, and there could be tens or hundreds of HTML files depending on the project, the browser has to download the styles each time a new page is loaded. And it also means that we're duplicating a lot of the same styles across multiple pages, which defeats the real purpose and convenience behind using CSS.